The air inside the shelter was thick with the smell of bleach and wet fur, and the only sound was the rhythmic squeaking of a mop being dragged across the floor by a tired staff member. Rows of metal kennels stretched down both sides of the long hallway, each cage holding a different kind of hope, tails wagging, tongues lolling, paws pressed against bars in a silent plea to be noticed. But down at the very end of the hallway, in the farthest, quietest corner, was a kennel that almost everyone skipped. And in that kennel lay a dog who had long stopped believing he'd be chosen. His name was Lucky, though no one could quite say why. The name was printed in faded black letters on a laminated card clipped to the front of his kennel, right below his ID number and a short, cheerful bio that read, "Sweet, brave boy, loves people, loves cuddles, a survivor." But the words did little to hide the truth. Lucky was a three-legged mutt with a dull coat and sad, soulful eyes. He was missing his back right leg, amputated after a car hit him nearly a year ago. The driver never stopped. A witness had called animal control, and Lucky was taken in with a shattered leg, bruised ribs, and a heart that still somehow beat with gentle hope. He had survived the surgery. He had survived the pain. But what he hadn't survived, not really, was the loneliness that followed. Month after month, potential adopters would pass him by. Children would gawk. Some would whisper, "What happened to him?" while parents pulled them away gently with tight smiles. Others wouldn't even stop to look. They wanted puppies, or at least dogs that looked normal. Dogs that could run, fetch, jump. Lucky couldn't do any of those things anymore. What he could do, sit calmly, nuzzle softly, gaze with eyes that seemed to understand every kind of sadness, didn't seem to matter. Still, every time someone walked down the hall, Lucky would lift his head with a soft spark of hope. His tail would thump once or twice, slowly, tentatively. Maybe this time, maybe this person. But over time, the spark dimmed. He began to stay curled up more often, resting his chin on a faded, torn stuffed rabbit that he'd carried with him since the day he arrived. The rabbit's ears were chewed, one completely missing, its white fur turned gray from the ears. It had been found in the back seat of the crash car with Lucky, the only thing he'd had. Volunteers had tried replacing it with newer toys, but Lucky always found his way back to that old rabbit, nuzzling it the way a child holds onto a worn-out blanket. It was his comfort, his memory of something soft and familiar in a world that had taken everything else. Clara, one of the longtime volunteers, had taken a special liking to Lucky. She'd been there the day he came in, trembling and bleeding, but still trying to lick the hands of the vet techs tending to him. She brushed his fur on weekends, fed him small bits of cooked chicken when no one was looking, and often sat beside his kennel after closing hours, just talking to him like he was an old friend. "You're still waiting, huh?" she'd whisper through the bars. "Someone out there needs you. They just don't know it yet." She believed that. She had to, because to look into Lucky's eyes, to see the quiet strength, the way he still leaned in to touch despite all the hurt, was to understand that this dog was special. Not flashy, not fast, not full of tricks, but he had a gift. The kind that didn't bark for attention. The kind that healed quietly. As the months passed, the shelter grew louder, busier. Puppies came in by the litter, their squeals echoing through the hallways. Younger, healthier dogs got featured on flyers, social media posts, weekend adoption fairs. Lucky was always included, technically. He had his own post once with a picture taken from his good side. "Meet Lucky, our resilient sweetheart looking for a forever home." But the likes were low, the comments quiet. No inquiries came in. Eventually, Lucky's kennel became the one the new volunteers avoided. His story was too sad. It clung to people. It made their chests tight. One of them once said, "I wish we could do more for him," but people just want happy dogs. That evening, Clara stayed late. She sat in front of Lucky's kennel with her legs crossed and tears in her eyes. You're not broken, you know? You're just waiting for the right person. Maybe they're a little broken too. Lucky pressed his head against the bars and let out a soft whine. Then came the shelter's annual spring adoption fair, the biggest event of the year. Staff decorated the outside area with bright banners that read, "Find your forever friend." Tents were set up, music played, and volunteers led dogs out to greet families. Kids ran from one playpen to another, laughing as dogs jumped and barked with joy. Lucky, however, was not invited to the front. The manager said he might be too shy and not energetic enough for the upbeat crowd. Clara argued gently, but firmly, but the decision had already been made. So Lucky stayed in the back, his kennel cleaned and his rabbit washed for the occasion. But with no visitors dot from his spot in the farthest corner of the hallway, Lucky watched as other dogs were chosen. One by one, leashes clipped, tails wagging, they left with excited families. Some had balloons tied to their collars. Others got photos taken under the "Adopted" sign. The hallway slowly emptied. The music faded. The sun began to dip low, casting orange light across the floor tiles. Lucky curled up in the corner of his kennel, stuffed rabbit under his chin, and closed his eyes. Then, soft footsteps. A smaller pair than usual, light, hesitant. Lucky opened one eye. Standing just outside his kennel was a little girl in a pale blue hoodie, her hair braided to one side, eyes wide and solemn. She wasn't bouncing or pointing like the other children had. She wasn't asking questions or dragging her mother along. She just stood there, quietly, staring. Lucky lifted his head. The girl crouched down and placed her small hand on the bars between them. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, Lucky limped forward. He pressed his nose gently against the cold metal, right where her fingers were. And for the first time in months, his tail thumped once, then twice. Isabella hadn't spoken in 273 days. Her mother, Maria, knew the number by heart, not because she counted with resentment, but because she clung to the hope that every new sunrise would be the one to break the silence. Isabella had been just 9 when her world fell apart. Her father, Daniel, was everything to her. The one who read bedtime stories with silly voices, who packed her lunch with smiley faces drawn on napkins, who danced with her in the kitchen to old jazz records. And then one rainy June morning, he was gone. A sudden heart attack. No warnings. No time for goodbye. In the days that followed the funeral, Isabella went from a vibrant, laughing child to a silent, shadow-like figure. At first, they all told Maria it was normal. Grief took its time. But weeks turned to months, and the once bubbly girl refused to speak. Not a whisper, not a single syllable. At school, teachers grew concerned. Therapists tried gently. Her mother cried at night, begging the universe for a sign, anything that could bring her little girl back. Maria had tried everything: music therapy, art therapy, horseback riding lessons, even a weekend trip to a beach Daniel used to take them. But Isabella remained unreachable, like she was behind an invisible wall with no door. And then came the morning of the adoption fair. Maria didn't expect magic, but she remembered how, when Isabella was younger, she used to light up whenever she saw a dog, any dog. She'd giggle and tug her father's hand, asking if they could pet it. "One day we'll get one," Daniel would always say with a wink. They hadn't gotten the chance. Maria had told herself Isabella wasn't ready, that it would be too painful. But watching her daughter sit cross-legged in the corner of her bedroom, quietly brushing her old stuffed bear's fur, something stirred in Maria's heart. Maybe it was time. Not for healing, not all at once, but for the tiniest seed of a dot, so she packed a small bag of smacks, tucked Isabella's drawing book into it just in case, and drove them to the shelter's event. The crowd overwhelmed Maria almost instantly. Children squealed with delight as they met puppies. Volunteers shouted cheerful greetings. Music blared from the speakers by the food trucks. Everywhere she looked, dogs bounced and barked. Families posed for pictures. It should have been joyful. But as she glanced down at Isabella, silent, hands deep in her hoodie pockets, eyes scanning without really seeing, Maria feared it had been a mistake. They walked the rows of enclosures in quiet. Volunteers tried to engage Isabella, offering leashes and letting her pet excited dogs. But she would just smile faintly and shake her head. Not a word. Not even a touch. After a while, they drifted toward the back of the building, where the kennels were quieter, the dogs less enthusiastic, older, slower. The ones that didn't get as many visitors. That's when Maria noticed the shift. Isabella had stopped. Walking, she stood still, staring into the last kennel in the row. Maria turned to look and saw him. The dog had 3 legs, a battered stuffed rabbit, and eyes that looked like they carried 1,000 unspoken stories. He didn't bark. He didn't jump. He just laid there, watching Isabella with a quiet focus that seemed knowing. Isabella knelt slowly in front of the kennel. No one said anything. Not Maria, not the dog. There was a stillness between them, heavy but not cold. Isabella reached her fingers toward the bars. The dog lifted his head and slowly limped forward, placing his nose gently against her fingertips, and for the first time in months, Maria saw something real flicker in her daughter's face. Not just polite smiles or nods. This was different. Her eyes softened. Her shoulders eased. She didn't pull away. "His name's Lucky," a voice came from behind them. It was Clara, stepping quietly to the side, sensing the gravity of the moment. "He's been here almost a year, hit by a car. Lost a leg. No one's picked him." Maria nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving Isabella. "He doesn't bark," she said quietly. "No," Clara replied with a gentle smile. "He doesn't make much noise, but he listens like no one else." Isabella was now sitting cross-legged, inches from the kennel. Lucky had laid down again, facing her, the stuffed rabbit still between his paws. Neither of them moved, but there was something profound unfolding in that silence, something Maria couldn't explain, but felt deeply in her bones. Minutes passed. Maybe longer. Clara stepped away, giving them space. Maria sat on a nearby bench, watching her daughter interact, or rather, just be, with the dog who didn't ask for anything but presence. Then it happened. Isabella turned her head, slowly, and looked at her mother. Her lips parted, and though it came out in a whisper so soft Maria barely heard it, it was unmistakable. "Mom." Maria's heart stopped. She rose, eyes wide, walking slowly toward her daughter, unsure if she'd imagined it. "Sweetheart, what did you say?" Isabella didn't answer right away. She turned back to Lucky, reached her hand through the bars, and rested it lightly on his head. Then she spoke again, barely above a whisper, but with weight enough to crack a stone wall. "I want him." Tears spilled down Maria's cheeks before she could even think. She knelt beside her daughter and cupped her face gently. "Are you sure, Isa? He's not like the other dogs." Isabella looked at her, and there was no hesitation. "I'm not like the other kids." It broke Maria completely. Clara returned, having seen it all from around the corner. She didn't ask questions, didn't interrupt. She simply knelt and opened the kennel door. Lucky didn't bolt. He didn't need encouragement. He stood slowly, limped forward, and pressed his face into Isabella's chest. The girl wrapped her arms around him, and for the first time in nearly a year, she let herself cry. They weren't loud sobs, just tears, quiet, cleansing. The kind that didn't scream pain, but whispered release. Lucky stayed perfectly still, eyes closed, tail swaying gently against the floor. From a distance, some people glanced at the sight of the little girl and the three-legged dog in each other's arms. But they couldn't possibly know what was unfolding, what had just begun. It was the start of something beautiful. The car ride home was quiet, not in the way most silences were with Isabella, but in a new, softer way. Lucky lay across the back seat, his head resting gently in Isabella's lap, while her fingers moved through the short, scruffy fur behind his ears. Her mother, Maria, kept glancing at the rearview mirror, not to check on traffic, but to reassure herself that what had just happened wasn't a dream. Her daughter had spoken, she had cried, and now she was smiling, not a loud, boisterous smile, but one of those subtle, real ones that warmed the air like morning sunlight. When they pulled into the driveway, Lucky lifted his head. His ears perked slightly, sensing something new, something unfamiliar. Isabella unbuckled her seatbelt and waited. Maria opened the door and Lucky slowly stood, his front paws on the floorboard and his back leg, his only back leg, stretching. As he adjusted, it was his first time outside the shelter walls in over a year. He didn't leap out. He didn't bark or bolt. He stood still for a moment, sniffing the air. The smells were foreign: trees, grass, flowers, home. Isabella waited, patiently, her hand outstretched. Lucky took a cautious step, then another, limping toward her, tail wagging in slow rhythm. As his paw touched the sidewalk leading to the front door, he paused and looked up at her. She smiled and whispered, "Welcome home." Inside the house, Maria had cleared a corner in Isabella's room, set up a soft new dog bed, a few chew toys, and a fresh water bowl. But Lucky ignored the setup completely. He followed Isabella into her room and, before she could even close the door, curled up beside her bed. She sat down next to him, knees pulled into her chest, and he gently rested his head on her foot. That first night, they didn't speak much, not in words anyway, but the connection between them grew like roots beneath the soil, unseen but undeniable. Isabella would wake in the night and feel the warmth of Lucky's body near her. Whenever she stirred or shifted, he'd lift his head, checking on her. He didn't need commands. He just knew. Over the next few days, something remarkable began to happen. Maria would hear faint giggles from Isabella's room. She caught glimpses of her daughter lying on her stomach, sketching Lucky as he dozed beside her. One afternoon, she overheard Isabella humming, the same song her father used to sing to her at bedtime. Maria sat outside the door and cried, hand pressed to her mouth, not daring to interrupt. Isabella still didn't talk much, but her silence had changed. It wasn't heavy anymore. It wasn't filled with sorrow or distance. It was just peaceful, safe, and Lucky, the dog who had been overlooked, rejected, left behind, had somehow become the bridge between the world and her heart. Walking together was a challenge at first. Lucky had to find a rhythm with his 3 legs, and Isabella had to learn his pace. But they figured it out, slowly, gently. Their morning routine began with a quiet breakfast and a short walk around the block. Neighbors would smile and wave, some commenting on how brave the dog looked or how sweet the girl was. Isabella never responded verbally, but she started waving back. Every day, a little more. One day, a boy from the neighborhood named Eli stopped by with his golden retriever, Max. He waved and asked if they could walk together. Isabella hesitated, eyes shifting down. But Lucky stepped forward, tail wagging. She looked at him, then at the boy, and gave the faintest nod. That walk lasted only 15 minutes, but it was 15 minutes of yes in a world full of no for too long. Lucky made friends wherever he went. Kids at the park would stare at first, some asking if he was okay, if he hurt. Isabella began to whisper responses. He's okay, he's strong. Parents looked at Maria in awe when she explained how her daughter hadn't spoken in nearly a year. And now here she was, explaining her dog story to strangers. At night, Isabella began writing again, small entries in a notebook her father had given her. On the first page, she drew Lucky with 3 legs and a superhero cape. Underneath, she wrote, "He saved me before I saved him." The next pages were filled with stories, some real, some imagined, of Lucky flying, swimming, being a pirate, chasing clouds. They were stories of courage and loss, healing and friendship. Maria read them quietly one evening and had to leave the room before the tears came too fast. There were still hard days. Days when Isabella would stare at her father's picture too long. Days when the shadows crept back in. But Lucky was always there, pressing his head into her lap, licking away tears before they fell, nuzzling her hand until she smiled. Then came the moment Maria hadn't dared hope for. It was a Sunday morning. The sky was pale blue, birds chirping. Outside the open window, Isabella was sitting cross-legged on the floor, brushing Lucky's fur as he lay belly up, soaking in the attention. Maria walked in with laundry, smiled and said, "He looks like royalty." Isabella didn't just smile. She looked up and said clearly, "He's my knight." Maria froze. The words weren't whispered. They weren't hesitant. They were whole, honest, bright. "He protects me," Isabella continued, eyes fixed on Lucky. "Even when I don't ask him to." Maria dropped the laundry basket. She knelt beside her daughter and wrapped her in a hug so tight it made Lucky bark in surprise. Isabella laughed, a sound that filled the house with sunlight. Lucky stood, licking both of their faces, tail wagging like he knew what had just happened. He was her knight, and she, his sanctuary. In that moment, in a house that had once felt far too quiet, 2 hearts, one broken by loss, the other by neglect, had stitched themselves together with invisible thread, the kind spun by love and time and trust. Maria looked at the dog who had changed everything and whispered, "Thank you." Lucky pressed his head into her chest, and somehow it felt like he whispered back. Autumn arrived with crisp air and golden leaves that danced like memories across the sidewalks. The neighborhood transformed into a patchwork of reds, oranges, and yellows, and Lucky adored every bit of it. His favorite thing was stepping through the crunchy leaves on his morning walks with Isabella, his remaining back leg moving in a steady, determined rhythm. He'd limp forward, sniffing each new scent with a wag of the tail, while Isabella walked beside him, quiet but visibly brighter. With every step, her hood was down more now. She met eyes with people. She smiled at neighbors. She even laughed when Lucky chased a squirrel he had no chance of catching. The world, it seemed, had started breathing again. School had become part of Isabella's rhythm once more. She still sat near the back, quiet and observant, but she no longer recoiled when spoken to. She wrote stories during recess, pages filled with adventures starring a brave 3-legged dog and his girl. Her teacher, Miss Clark, once pulled Maria aside and said, "I don't know exactly what changed, but your daughter, she's glowing." Maria smiled through tears. "His name is Lucky." But as often happens in life, just when things feel steady, storms come. Not always the kind with thunder and rain. Sometimes the storm is a single moment that shakes your soul. It happened on a Thursday. Isabella was helping Maria rake leaves in the front yard while Lucky lounged in a sunny patch nearby, his worn stuffed rabbit lying by his paw. Isabella was mid-laugh, her hair a mess of wind and leaves, when a passing car backfired loudly. The sudden sharp pop echoed down the street like a gunshot. Lucky jolted. His eyes went wide, and before anyone could react, he bolted. Isabella screamed, "Lucky!" He ran, limping as fast as his body would allow, his mind seemingly transported back to some distant trauma. The sound had pulled something from deep inside, fear that had never fully healed. He sprinted down the street, his uneven gait frantic and wild. Cutting around corners and out of sight, Isabella dropped the rake and chased after him. But she was no match for his panic. Maria ran too, yelling his name. Neighbors stepped out. To help, someone got on a bike, but Lucky had vanished, gone into the maze of backyards, alleys, and open streets. The hours that followed were a blur of tears, shouted names, and desperate searching. Isabella put up posters. Maria called every nearby vet, every shelter. They searched until the sky turned black and the stars blinked into existence, cold and silent. That night, Isabella refused to come inside. She sat on the porch with Lucky's blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her eyes glued to the darkness. "I can't lose him too," she whispered for the first time. Maria sat beside her, heart breaking all over again. "We'll find him, Isa. He found you. He'll find his way back." But as hours turned into days, hope began to waver. People called in with sightings. A dog near the park, one behind the grocery store, but every time they arrived, he was gone. Maria's phone rang endlessly. Isabella stopped eating. She barely slept. She sat by the door every evening, clutching the stuffed rabbit Lucky had left behind. One afternoon, as rain poured outside, Isabella stood in the hallway holding the toy and turned to her mother. "What if he's scared? What if he thinks I didn't try hard enough to stop him?" Maria hugged her tight. "He knows, baby. He knows you love him." The following week passed in aching silence. Then, on the 8th morning, as fog rolled across the pavement and dew clung to the grass, the phone rang again. This time, it was a jogger who often ran near the edge of the woods behind the elementary school. "I saw him," the man said. "He's under that old covered bridge. Looks weak. Been there for days, I think. I couldn't get close," he growled, "but he's definitely the one from your flyer." Maria didn't wait. She and Isabella raced to the spot, hearts pounding. The bridge was old and rarely used, covered in moss and overgrown vines. As they approached, Maria saw the outline first, curled into a tight ball, muddy and trembling. Isabella dropped to her knees. "Lucky!" she cried out. The dog didn't move. She crawled closer, holding the stuffed rabbit in front of her. "Please, it's me. It's okay. I'm here." At the sound of her voice, that small, shaky whisper that had once been lost to the world, Lucky stirred. He lifted his head slowly, eyes glazed, ribs showing beneath his fur, but when he saw her, something shifted. His tail gave the faintest thump. Isabella didn't rush him. She sat, legs tucked under her, just like she had that first day at the shelter. She placed the rabbit on the ground between them. "I brought your friend," she said. Lucky sniffed it. Then, with a trembling body and all the strength he had left, he crawled forward and rested his head in her lap. Maria burst into tears. They didn't speak for a long time. Isabella simply held him, her fingers running through his dirty fur, whispering words of love, of home, of "you're safe now." With the help of a nearby vet who came with supplies, Lucky was gently wrapped in a blanket and carried to the car. His recovery took weeks. He had a mild infection, dehydration, and bruises from running into fencing. But he healed slowly, stubbornly, with Isabella beside him every step of the way. During his first night home, Isabella stayed up, brushing him clean with a soft towel, humming their song. "You came back," she whispered, "just like you promised." Lucky leaned into her, his eyes closing, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm that said, "I never meant to leave." And as fall gave way to winter, The house, once full of silence, now echoed with laughter, footsteps, and the gentle thump of a three-legged dog's tail. They had survived the fall, both literally and metaphorically, and had risen together once more. Snow had begun to fall by the time December fully settled in, blanketing the world outside Isabella's window with soft white silence. The streets glistened under the morning sun, and icicles hung from rooftops like nature's delicate chandeliers. It was the kind of cold that curled around your fingers and seeped into your sleeves. But inside the little house at the end of Birchwood Lane, warmth was found in every corner. Especially wherever Lucky was, he had recovered well. His fur had grown thick again, hiding the scars beneath, though his limp remained. The vet said it always would. But that limp had become part of him now, just like the way he leaned into Isabella when she read to him, or the little snorting sound he made when she scratched behind his ear. It was all part of the dog who had returned from the edge of fear and found his place, not just in a home, but in a soul. Isabella had changed. 2. It was gradual, not a switch flipped overnight. But every day since Lucky's return, she'd grown a little more herself again. The quiet girl who once drifted through life like a ghost was now present, grounded. She laughed, she wrote, she even started sharing Lucky's story with others at school. Her teacher invited her to present in front of the class and to everyone's surprise, she agreed. On the day of the presentation, she brought Lucky along and told the room full of wide-eyed kids about how she met him, how he'd been overlooked and unwanted, and how he saved her without needing to speak. "I was broken," she said at the end, her voice soft but clear, "and so was he. But when we found each other, we started healing." There wasn't a dry eye in the classroom that day. Even Miss Clark had to dab at her cheeks. After school, kids would stop Isabella in the hallways just to ask how Lucky was doing. Some even drew pictures of him, 3 legs and all, wearing superhero capes or sitting like a king. For the first time since her father's death, Isabella felt seen, and not because people pitied her, but because she had something beautiful to share. Because her pain had been transformed into purpose. Maria watched it all from the sidelines, sometimes in awe, sometimes still afraid it might all vanish. But every time she saw Isabella curled up with Lucky, reading stories by the fireplace or sketching new adventures in her notebook, her heart quieted. This was real. This was healing. The holidays came quickly. The house filled with decorations, the scent of cinnamon and pine, and the gentle hum of old Christmas music that Daniel had once played every year. Isabella hung their family stockings. By the mantel, one for her, one for Maria, and a brand new one stitched by hand with the word Lucky in big green letters. Christmas Eve was simple. Just the 3 of them, mother, daughter, and dog. They baked cookies, watched old cartoons, and opened one gift each. Lucky's was a new rabbit toy, soft and clean but nearly identical to his worn-out companion. He looked at it, sniffed it, then gently placed it beside the original, as if to say, "There's room for both in my heart." That night, snow fell heavier, frosting the windows in white. Isabella curled up under her blanket, Lucky beside her, his body a warm, steady presence. Before sleep took her, she whispered, "Thank you for finding me." Lucky, already half asleep, gave a quiet sigh and rested his head on her shoulder. In the morning, Isabella woke early. Sunlight spilled across the floor, golden and pure. She rubbed her eyes and reached for Lucky, but he wasn't there. "Lucky?" she called softly. No sound. She stood, heart fluttering, and walked into the hallway. There, in the living room, she found him sitting quietly in front of the window, staring out at the snow. His stuffed rabbit was tucked beneath one paw. When he heard her, his ears perked and his tail gave a sleepy thump. She sat beside him, her arms wrapping around his neck. "Merry Christmas," she whispered. They sat like that for a long time. just watching the snow fall in gentle silence. That afternoon, they visited the shelter. Isabella had asked if they could bring cookies and some toys for the dogs who hadn't found homes yet. Lucky wore a red scarf and sat proudly by her side as she handed out treats and quietly thanked the volunteers. Clara was still there smiling, eyes misty with joy as she watched the girl who once couldn't speak now comfort another dog who just arrived. Frightened and shaking, "She's different now," Clara said to Maria, "but it's more than that. She's alive again." Maria nodded, her heart full. "So is he." As they prepared to leave, Isabella paused at Lucky's old kennel, the empty one at the very end of the hall. She stood quietly for a moment, then took a small handmade card from her coat pocket and slid it through the bars. It read, "To the next dog who sleeps here, don't give up. Your person is coming. I promise." Love, Lucky, and Isabella back home. The days grew shorter, the nights colder, but warmth filled every corner of their lives. Lucky and Isabella settled into a rhythm that no one else could understand, an unspoken language, a bond built not on noise or tricks, but on trust, patience, and second chances. They still had hard days. Grief doesn't vanish. But now, Isabella had a companion to carry it with her. And Lucky, the dog no one wanted, had someone who believed in him enough to give him the forever he'd never dared dream of. Spring eventually came, melting the snow, waking the earth from slumber. Isabella would take Lucky to the meadow behind the house, where wildflowers grew in colors that made her heart ache with beauty. She'd sit in the grass, drawing while Lucky napped beside her, the wind tugging gently at their hair and fur. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and lavender, Isabella turned to her mother and said, "You know what I realized?" Maria looked up from her book. "What's that?" "I used to think Lucky was the broken one," she said, scratching his ears gently. "But he's the strongest thing I've ever known," Maria smiled. "So are you." Lucky opened one eye and wagged his tail once, as if agreeing with both of them. And in that moment, surrounded by love and quiet light, they understood something most people never do, that healing doesn't come with fanfare. It comes slowly, like snow melting in spring. It comes with soft steps, warm glances, and three-legged dogs who teach lonely girls how to live again. It comes in the form of forever. And forever. They knew it was a quiet kind of love. Asterisk, asterisk, if this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Cutest Gallery. This is the emotional journey of a three-legged dog no one wanted, until he helped a lonely girl learn to live again. Their bond shows that even the most broken hearts can heal each other. We'd love to hear from you. Write a comment below and tell us what part of the story moved you the most. Your words mean the world to us and help keep these stories alive. Stay tuned for more heartwarming dog tailies that bring love and hope to life.